After being found by my biological parents, I revealed my identity, which shocked them. If it weren't for the sudden visit from the production team, I had almost forgotten about the family search program I signed up for in college. At that time, I had just learned that I was adopted. I still had a glimmer of hope for my biological parents, but too much time had passed. I had long forgotten about it. At that time, I had just returned from working in the fields. I was wearing rubber boots. My old cotton jacket was already soaked by the rain. When the crew saw me, the excitement on their faces turned into a bit of sympathy. The cameraman immediately pointed the camera at my face. He asked, "What expectations do you have for your biological parents whom you've never met? After recognizing your biological parents, will you leave your adoptive parents who raised you for 28 years? I heard your brother earns over $10,000 a month. Do you feel a sense of imbalance? Do you ever think, if only it had been your brother who was abandoned instead?" After listening to his words, I frowned tightly. I was just about to let them go. My mother held my hand. She gently shook her head. She said, "Child, since they came to find you, you should go take a look." My mother is always like this. In the past, I earned money. I bought them a villa, but they are unwilling to move in. They just can't let go of this old house they've lived in for decades. They don't spend a single cent of the money I give them. Every day they love to work in the fields, watering the vegetables. I really have no way out. I had no choice but to help them renovate the house. Whenever I have free time, I go back to the countryside. I take off my suit and put on an apron and an old cotton jacket. I help them work in the fields. Here, my parents are still trying to persuade me. Over there, I can hear the complaints of middle-aged women. "What did you say? Is this my son's home? If I had known he lived in such a remote valley, I wouldn't have come. Isn't your production team deceiving us? I want to file a complaint against you." I looked up. The woman was still complaining incessantly. The middle-aged man next to her also looked displeased. The crew members quickly surrounded her. They said some kind words to calm her down. In the end, the woman was finally persuaded by them. She threw a box of long unsold 8 treasure porridge in front of me and said, "You are my son Matthew." She scrutinized me from top to bottom. Her gaze was filled with disdain. "No wonder you spent 11 years looking for us. Turns out you wanted to rely on us for a good life." I suddenly felt quite disappointed inside. The tone of my voice involuntarily turned a bit cold. "You misunderstood. 11 years ago, I just suddenly wanted to sign up and give it a try. I never expected to find you. I never expected to find you. Besides, I think my family is doing well. There's really no need for you to change anything. Listen to what I have to say." Then the middle-aged man suddenly laughed. "It's normal for young people to be proud, but being too arrogant is not good." My biological father, William, patted my shoulder. His tone carried a sense of condescension. He said, "No matter what, you are still my son. I can't just watch you waste the second half of your life in the fields. When you go back, I'll have your brother find you a job. He is in management at a publicly listed company. Even if you know nothing, serving tea and cleaning at the company is much better than farming. Also, when you return, your name needs to be changed. It's not feudal society anymore. The name Tai Zhui is really embarrassing. This name was given to me by my adoptive parents when they found me. They thought I might not survive, so they specifically named me that. Later, as my health improved, my adoptive parents immediately took me to change my name. But the villagers are used to calling me that. Just call me Matthew." William proudly lifted his chin. He looked very proud. My biological mother, Sophia, couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Wife, think about it. Even though they are all biological sons, but their personalities and abilities are just different. What good can come from a poor place?" I was so angry that I threw away the 8 treasure porridge they brought. "You all should leave quickly. My home does not welcome you." Seeing the situation at a standstill, the production team immediately contacted my parents. They started to persuade using familial ties. My parents are down-to-earth people. They were worried about conflicts between me and my biological parents. My mom picked up the 8 treasure porridge that I had just thrown away. She even invited William and Sophia to come inside and sit down. Seeing my mom do this, Their expressions improved a little. Suddenly, a BMW stopped in front of my house. After Daniel got out of the car, he casually picked up a piece of clothing from the drying rack. He used it to wipe the mud off the car. He complained, "This place is really terrible. My brand new car is all dirty now." Daniel was wearing a gray suit. He had leather shoes on. He was dressed very formally. I frowned as soon as I saw him. I always felt this person looked a bit familiar. Sophia happily ran over to greet him. William glanced at me. He raised his voice and said, "This is your younger brother Daniel. He specifically took a day off from work to come see you. Do you know how much his salary will be deducted for taking a day off?" Even though I really didn't want to talk to them, but to avoid making Mom and Dad sad, I still responded, "How much? Are they going to deduct him millions? I'm calculating this based on my own salary for one day off. I'm not just guessing." William's mouth twitched slightly. His eyes revealed a hint of displeasure. $500. You only earn a few thousand a year, right, in the distance. Daniel approached with Sophia and the camera crew. He impatiently clicked his tongue. He said, "Dad, what's there to say to someone like him? He probably has only seen a few million on TV." At that moment, my mom invited everyone to the yard for tea. Daniel just took a sip and immediately spat it out. I rushed forward and shielded my mom behind me. "Daniel, if you don't want to drink, then don't. Why spit on my mom?" Sophia quickly poured him a glass of hot water to rinse his mouth, seeing me protect my adoptive mother. Sophia's tone was a bit strange. "I forgot to tell you, Daniel can't get used to cheap tea leaves," she sneered. Her tone was filled with sarcasm. "That tea you have costs $10 for a big bag. Just save it for feeding the pigs." My mother's face turned pale. Her lips slightly parted and then tightly closed. Suddenly, a person from the production team pointed at the aluminum foil packaging of the tea and said loudly, "Isn't this that kind of Snow Mountain silver needle worth $500,000 per gram?" He held the teacup and took another careful sip. His face showed a look of shock. Even his muscles were slightly trembling. "That's right, absolutely right. I had it once at Director Wang's place. It's exactly this taste." Daniel quickly snatched the aluminum foil from a member of the production team. The piece of aluminum foil in his hand was already wrinkled beyond recognition. It looked particularly cheap. He relaxed his expression. He casually tossed the aluminum foil into the trash can and raised an eyebrow at me. With a provocative tone, he said, "What Snow Mountain silver needle? I think it's just a counterfeit." The people from the production team stopped talking. It felt a bit awkward. My dad took out his prized Cohiba cigars. They had been kept in a tin box, and he was reluctant to smoke them. He handed one out to everyone present. When it was time to distribute cigars to William and his son, both of them couldn't even be bothered to reach out. Daniel even shot a sideways glance. He disdainfully said, "You've rolled your own cigarettes. Who would dare to smoke them? Smoking so much, don't you fear getting lung cancer?" My dad wasn't angry when he heard that. He smiled and said to everyone, "This is what my son brought back for me from abroad. What's it called? Oh dear, I can't remember the name at the moment. Feel free to drink and smoke as you like." I watched my dad take out a cigar worth over $100,000. He distributed it to over 20 people present. If this normally frugal old man knew the price of the cigars, he would surely be scared into the hospital. As soon as my dad finished speaking, Daniel couldn't help but laugh out loud. He glanced at me. His eyes showed disdain. "If you can't afford good cigarettes, just say so. Why let your dad pretend that homemade cigarettes are high-end brands?" I sighed. I shook my head. I thought he was too naive. "If you don't believe me, just try it for yourself and you'll know." Daniel glanced at me. Then he shouted to everyone, "Who knows what's in these cigarettes? Everyone, please don't smoke them." Then he took out his pack of premium cigarettes. He said, "Come smoke mine." I had to wait half a month to get these. Someone on site immediately recognized the price. This is a pack of premium cigarettes worth $30,000. These cigarettes are not cheap." Daniel wore a proud expression. He casually showed off the watch on his wrist. "Oh my, I must be seeing things. He's wearing an Omega. I remember that watch cost 100,000 yuan. I wanted to buy it last time. Unfortunately, My wife didn't agree. The older brother with the camera had a hint of regret in his eyes. I just finished messaging a colleague from my village. Daniel was quick on his feet. He grabbed my hand in one motion. He aimed the camera at me. He didn't hide his laughter at all. "Matthew, I told you you're poor. You really like to show off. I'm almost out of money for food. What else are you buying fake stuff for?" I really couldn't hold back. My tone became a bit heavier. "I'm warning you. Let go quickly." Sophia pouted. Her tone carried a hint of dissatisfaction. Sophia said, "Son, don't spoil his bad habits. You know, I hate it when others wear fakes in front of me." Daniel not only didn't back down, but also took advantage of my distraction. He smashed my Patek Philippe watch hard onto the ground. I watched as he stepped on the watch. The watch face shattered into pieces. Daniel lifted his foot. A malicious smile appeared on his face. "Looks like this thing isn't that impressive after all." My eyes turned red. I picked up the shards from the ground. I shouted loudly at Daniel, "You know this watch is worth 200 million. Daniel hadn't said a word yet. Sophia nearby seemed to have heard something particularly funny. William wiped away the tears of laughter. Then he said, "If your watch is worth 200 million, I would immediately bow to you. I would call you Dad. Men always like to pretend to be normal, but I've never seen anyone who can pretend like you." He patted me on the shoulder, with a hint of sympathy on his face. "You should read more books. I heard you only have a primary school education. You might not be clear about the concept of 200 million. I was actually planning to take you home, but look at how wealthy you are. I guess you don't care about our family anymore." William finished speaking. He waved goodbye to the production team. He said, "Let's leave the matter of kinship here. I only have one son, Daniel. Everyone can disperse now. Elementary school diploma. Then how did I get my 985 graduation certificate?" He was just about to leave. I coldly spoke up. "Your son broke my watch. Are we just going to let this slide?" Daniel impatiently threw me 1,000 yuan. He even poked my shoulder with his finger. "This money is enough to compensate for your broken watch. What do you think? Am I not generous?" He hadn't even had the chance to smile yet. From a distance, a man's anxious voice called out, "Daniel, what exactly did you do to our president?" Daniel turned around. The smile on his face suddenly disappeared. He widened his eyes in surprise. "Team leader, how did you get here? You just mentioned our president. Where is he?" Daniel appears a bit flustered. His subordinates are very angry. They shouted at me, pointing. "Isn't the president right in front of you?" Daniel forced a smile. He stammered, How is this possible? He comes from a rural farming background. How could he be the president? Besides, the company president is named Michael, right? Don't lie to me." William and Sophia were stunned by this sudden change. The production team noticed the unexpected situation. They quickly adjusted the camera, pointed the lens at us. On screen, Daniel's expression looked particularly funny. This team leader is Daniel's direct supervisor. He is from the same village as me. He has a familial relationship with my adoptive parents and uncle. So when I recognized that Daniel was a small employee from our company, I immediately sent a text message to my subordinate from the same village. The subordinate took a deep breath. He was just about to speak. I interrupted him. I smiled slightly. "You might not know yet. Matthew is my nickname. My real name is Michael. As Daniel, in terms of identity and position, it's normal that he hasn't seen me in the company, but I have happened to see him a few times. Daniel looks quite impressive on the outside, but inside the company, there are elites everywhere. He can only do menial tasks like serving tea and water. Yesterday he had to stay late until dawn because he printed the documents incorrectly. So when I first saw him, I felt he looked a bit familiar." Daniel suddenly shivered, as if he was startled by something. My mother happily shook the subordinate's hand. Zhuang, you came at the right time. Just clarify things. Yi, don't be anxious. It's just a small misunderstanding." Sophia saw the titles between my mom and her subordinates. Suddenly, she understood something. She pointed at my mom and her subordinate. Her eyes were filled with the excitement of discovering the truth. "Your son is lying to you." Daniel was taken aback for a moment. Then he finally reacted. William had a look on his face as if he saw through everything. He disdainfully glanced at my subordinate. to put on a show for his own relatives. He actually lied about being the company president. Daniel, you go report him to the company immediately. Make sure he can't even be a team leader. After hearing William's words, Daniel felt a surge of joy in his heart. He quickly took out his phone and made a call. He asked, "Hello, is this Manager Gao?" He shot a fierce glare at his subordinate and said, "I want to report team leader Lai. He is going around deceiving people under the guise of being the president." "That's right. I'll send you the address." After Daniel finished the call, the smugness on his face was even more pronounced. The subordinate was so angry that his face turned red. "Daniel, are you stupid? Why would I lie to you about something like this?" I gave a cold smile. Not only was I not angry, but my smile became even more obvious. "Don't rush. Let him be smug for a while." Daniel spat at me. "Speak. Stop pretending. At this point you still refuse to admit it." Then he squinted his eyes, gently patted the subordinate's face. He said, "And you? The manager has praised me for reporting you. He also said you should resign immediately. Just wait and see." I heard my biological parents laughing at me. All my last hopes for them completely vanished, looking at my adoptive parents' worried faces. I don't understand why there is such a huge difference between people. 28 years ago, they thought I was too weak, unable to sustain. They just discarded me. 28 years later, they abandoned me again because of my poverty. This time, I want them to see with their own eyes how I, the one they gave up on, stood back up again and became a shining star. Just then, a few cars slowly drove into the narrow mountain road. Daniel ran over immediately to greet them. He yanked down a high-end suit from the drying rack and laid it on the muddy, bumpy ground. A group of people got out of the black luxury car. Leading them was a serious-looking man with an imposing presence. As soon as his suit jacket touched the ground, his face immediately showed a look of confusion. Before he could react, Daniel quickly pulled him and pointed towards me. He said, "He's the one pretending to be the president." Sophia's mouth almost curled up to the sky. She crossed her arms over her chest. She looked at me coldly. "Considering you're my son's matter, I'll give you a chance. As long as you kneel and bow to Daniel 3 times, I'll persuade him to spare you. Otherwise, you'll be caught for identity fraud and go to prison. I can't help you." William shook his head helplessly. His gaze towards me was filled with obvious disappointment. "I know you have some grievances against Daniel, but you have to admit, he is indeed much stronger than you. If you had grown up with us from a young age, your mom and I could have taught you to be even better." William paused at this point. He took a moment, then continued to speak. "What a pity. Who knew you'd have such bad luck? Being adopted by those 2 poor folks. Your current situation can only be blamed on your parents for not providing a good education." I casually adjusted my wrinkled sleeves and said lightly as I looked up, "Is that so? Then let him come and catch me. I'll see who is stronger." William was panting heavily. He shouted angrily, "You ignorant fool!" In the distance, Manager Gao listened to Daniel. He walked towards me with his bodyguards. Just as the bodyguard was about to grab me, I shot them a cold glare. The several big men were immediately stunned. They stood still, not daring to move. I was surrounded tightly by the bodyguards. Suddenly, I heard Manager Gao shouting from outside the crowd, "What are you still dawdling for? Quickly catch this fake president. Where is team leader Lai? I officially notify you now. You are fired." Listening to Manager Gao's arrogant words, my subordinates behind me were not nervous at all. Instead, they looked at him with sympathetic eyes. The bodyguards next to me were so nervous they kept swallowing. Cold sweat was breaking out on their foreheads. Daniel's face was filled with undeniable excitement. He kept nodding in agreement from the side. He looked just like a little dog hiding behind its owner, barking non-stop. "Yeah, what are we waiting for? People like this should be taught a good lesson," Manager Gao said arrogantly. "And also, Manager, look, shouldn't that team leader position be? Don't worry. You did well in reporting. When you get back, I'll arrange for you to be the team leader." The bodyguards were so anxious they were about to cry. "Manager, stop talking nonsense. It's taking you so long to catch someone. Are you not willing to do it anymore?" I slowly said in the crowd, "I think the person who doesn't want to do it is you." Suddenly, a threatening voice echoed in the air. upon hearing that voice. Manager Gao's eyes widened immediately. As soon as Manager Gao heard that voice, he immediately widened his eyes. His lips turned completely colorless. The bodyguards consciously made way for me. Manager Gao widened his eyes. Sweat trickled down his cheeks to his chin. However, Daniel was unaware of how inappropriate his behavior was. He walked towards me. He raised his hand to hit me. "Matthew, what you're doing is really too much. There should always be a measure in doing things. Today, my brother is here to teach you how to be a person." Just as the slap was about to hit me, a strong arm suddenly reached out. It firmly grabbed his hand. "What are you doing? Let go of me quickly. Didn't you all see it?" As Daniel struggled to breathe, he felt his hand nearly breaking under the bodyguard's grip. He couldn't help but ask, "Don't you know who I am?" Sophia saw her son being restrained. She hurriedly tried to slap the bodyguard. "What are you doing? Let him go quickly." She barely hit a few times before being pushed away by the bodyguard. William supports Sophia, just about to ask for clarification. I smiled and raised my hand. I waved it casually in the air. "Speak." "All right, let go." The bodyguards followed my instructions. They released their grip on Daniel's hand, quickly retreated behind me, standing straight, with a respectful attitude. Daniel rubbed his bruised hand. He looked at the bodyguard's actions in confusion. A sudden wave of indescribable fear surged in his heart. Manager Gao hurried to stand in front of me. His previously arrogant demeanor suddenly became very accommodating. He respectfully lowered his head, then angrily pointed at Daniel and said, "Michael, it's all his fault. He lied to me saying someone was impersonating you. That's why I came. Please don't take what I said earlier seriously. I really didn't expect it was you." Seeing I had no reaction, he quickly grabbed team leader Lai's hand, spoke urgently, "Could you say a few good words for me in front of Michael?" I was deceived by Daniel. That's why I said something I shouldn't have to Michael. Team leader Lai quickly pulled his hand back from Manager Gao. He was eager to distance himself from him. "You spoke carelessly, without understanding the situation. I can't help you either. Besides, didn't you just say you wanted to fire me? How can you ask me for help now?" Manager Gao's face turned even paler. He lowered his head, not daring to speak. Daniel staggered and fell to the ground. His whole body shook like a sieve. "This is impossible. How could you be Michael?" The production team has already checked my information. They compared my photo from the news with me in person. I was so surprised that I couldn't speak. "It really is Michael, the president of Smith Group." People's voices trembled while speaking. "Is he the one who made it into the top 10 of the domestic asset rankings last month? The real estate tycoon Michael, the 50,000 per gram tea that I just poured out. Could it really be the Snow Mountain Silver Needle?" The crew members were all stunned, their mouths agape. They didn't even care about filming. They hurried to grab the tea that hadn't been finished yet. Sophia and William's faces turned grim. Everyone saw the few scattered cigarettes on the stone table. Their eyes lit up. Someone shouted loudly, "This is the real Galaxy, bah, one stick costs over $100,000. Everyone, don't rush. 1 stick per person. 1 stick per person." Someone in the crew laughed out loud. Some even put down their cameras. "What's the point of filming now? Just selling one of these would be enough for me to eat and drink for half my life. I quit." Michael's dad is really generous. Such expensive cigarettes. Just giving them away casually. Someone didn't manage to grab a cigarette. Frustrated, they threw the gold bar Daniel gave them onto the ground. They stomped on it a few times. They complained out loud, "This gold brick is nothing special." They also say that smoking high-quality Zyba can lead to lung cancer. I'd like to see how you won't get lung cancer. The program team has their own hidden meanings. Daniel listened. He was so angry that his eyes turned red. My dad heard the program team's discussion. He tightly pinched my philtrum and asked me, "Son, what they said, is it true? It really costs over $1 million. Even my mom held her breath, listening carefully for my answer. That tea doesn't cost just a few bucks a pack. It's 500,000 per gram. I felt a darkness in my eyes. I leaned closer to them and whispered, "Mom and Dad, don't believe what they say." Money from abroad isn't worth much when converted to RMB. A million is only worth a bit over $100. 500,000 is just over $50. The few bodyguards around me heard this. They all fell silent. My mom still didn't believe it. She looked at me with confusion. Then she turned to look at the bodyguard. She wanted to get confirmation from him. "Really?" she asked. I nodded. Then I looked at the bodyguards. The 4 or 5 big men nodded repeatedly, like chicks pecking at grains. Only then did my mom breathe a sigh of relief. My dad finally regained his composure, but he still felt a bit reluctant. "Next time, the cigarettes you give me, I won't share them with you." The production team just took a short break. They began calling people again. Someone wiped the stone table in front of them, suddenly jumped up from the stone bench. "Why are the table and bench green? Could it be made of jade?" Sophia couldn't help but say, "Look at this texture. It looks like the imperial green I saw at the auction before. How could this possibly be made of jade? Who would use such precious material as imperial green to make a table?" William clenched his fists tightly, shouted loudly, "I think this thing is made of marble or glass with a bit of color added." "Right. You know how much imperial green is worth. Just talking nonsense. The imperial green ring my wife is wearing. I spent over 100,000 to buy it. What's wrong with the president? I don't think he's that rich either. Maybe he's just putting on a show for you all in the end." Her voice noticeably lowered. William and Sophia clearly saw that I was much better than their carefully cultivated Daniel. It was hard to accept this fact for a moment. I spoke up. I casually glanced at the piece of jade on Sophia's hand, which was no bigger than a fingernail. "Uncle William, you're being too stingy. If you hadn't told me that the thing on Aunt Sophia's hand was jade, I would have almost thought she accidentally got something dirty on her." Daniel stared at me intently, his eyes filled with deep hatred, as if I had done something particularly wrong to him. William also had red eyes. He straightened his neck. He shouted loudly at me, "That's better than using glass to fake imperial green." Someone brought over a bucket of water. They washed the dust off the stone table. The deep green light shone into everyone's eyes. It looked like a bottomless deep spring. It also had a heavy texture. It was definitely not comparable to ordinary glass or marble. "This is definitely imperial green. My grandfather is a top expert in stone appraisal, and I have also been involved in jade photography before. I absolutely won't make a mistake." A young man excitedly said to me, "If I'm not mistaken, the large jade stone worth over 100 million from some time ago must have been bought by you, Michael." I didn't expect the show's team to have good taste. They noticed this as well. Under his eager gaze, I slowly nodded and quietly replied, "You are right." William's complexion suddenly turned pale. Daniel was so jealous he nearly ground his teeth. As for Sophia, it's even more so. She fainted directly into William's arms. My mother quietly tugged at the hem of my clothes and whispered to me, "Son, that stone table." My mother looked a bit confused. I gently patted her hand and calmly explained, "What cultured people say is all foreign currency. This thing is actually only worth a little over 1,000. It's just something to play with. Besides, don't you and Dad both like it?" My mother wiped the sweat from her forehead. "Don't spend money recklessly in the future." "Okay, I'll remember that." The bodyguards were expressionless, but the corners of their mouths twitched slightly. This revealed that they were not as calm inside as they appeared. After the young man calmed down, he saw those jade stones made into tables and chairs, and couldn't help but feel it was somewhat wasteful. They suddenly realized why that millionaire CEO has parents living in such a remote place. The seemingly simple environment and low houses are actually just the result of their own arrogance and prejudice. At that moment, it was as if their eyes were opened. So the production team decided not to film the family reunion show. They temporarily changed it to a treasure hunt show. Under the careful observation of the production team, they discovered that the wood of the house is rosewood. The windows have exquisite carvings. The bowls are antiques from the Song dynasty. Even the old mobile phone hanging around my dad's neck was taken by the crew for a close-up shot. This phone is worth over 10 million. It's drop-resistant and durable. It won't get damaged even if soaked in water. The positioning function is particularly strong. The ringtone is so loud that it can be heard outside the village. It's truly hard to find a better phone than this. Sophia had just woken up and saw my dad being questioned in front of the camera by the crew. What does it feel like to have such a filial son? William beside us looks terrifyingly gloomy. Daniel is extremely angry, but he doesn't dare to say anything. My dad hasn't spoken yet. Sophia rushed into the frame. She said, "I am Michael's biological mother. Why are you asking them?" Sophia pushed my dad aside. Her eyes were filled with excitement. She shouted, "No matter what, I am the biological mother of the billionaire. This should all belong to me." Sophia looked at me with her loving eyes. She said, "A son is a piece of flesh that came from me. How could I not love him?" She looked at the jade table outside the yard. A hint of longing flashed in her eyes. Then she said to the person next to her, "Mom will take you home now. Okay, let's take that imperial green table with us too, shall we? Your dad loves drinking tea the most. Move the table back for him to use as a tea table. He will definitely be touched by your filial piety." William's previously gloomy expression disappeared. He smiled widely. He said excitedly, "Your mom is right. You go home with your parents. We will live well as a family." Their behavior shocked me greatly. I glanced at Daniel, who was ignored by them. He asked meaningfully, "What about him?" Noticing my hostility towards Daniel, William immediately said, "If you don't like your brother, then don't let him come back. Having you is enough." Daniel listened. He looked at William in surprise, thinking to himself, "I've grown up. Do I still have to live with you, Dad? This is so that he doesn't want me." Sophia interrupted him. She questioned him sharply. "What do you mean by that? I don't want you. If your brother were still here, maybe you wouldn't even exist. We raised you to this age. You should understand gratitude. Since your brother doesn't want to see you, you should leave quickly, so your brother won't be displeased." Daniel paused for a moment. He glared at me fiercely for a while. Then he turned to leave. "Wait." Sophia frowned. She asked me nervously, "Michael, do you have any other requests?" I smiled slightly. I asked in a cold tone. "He smashed my watch worth over $1 million. Let's just leave it at that." Daniel's hand suddenly clenched tightly. Sophia quickly stepped in to mediate. She said with a smiling face, "We are all family. Why take it so seriously? Your brother didn't mean it. He already knows he was wrong." After saying that, she kept signaling to Daniel. Daniel hadn't even stepped out the door. When he was pulled back by the bodyguard, he shouted, "Let go of me. Mom and Dad, come quickly and save me." Sophia suddenly held her breath. William immediately took on a senior's demeanor. He started scolding me without any courtesy. He said to my bodyguard, "After all, Daniel is your brother. Is an old watch really more important than the bond between you brothers? You guys with no insight, hurry up and let my son go. Otherwise, I'll report you to your boss and let him deal with you. My dad is right. Matthew, don't think you're impressive just because you're my boss. If you want my parents to accept you, then let me go quickly." Without waiting for Daniel to finish speaking, in front of William and Sophia, I directly slapped him. The slap left my hand numb. Daniel's face swelled up significantly. There's clearly a handprint. There's still blood oozing from the corner of his mouth. The crew members were whispering among themselves. That was a good hit. Daniel's face turned green with anger. Sophia shouted anxiously. She pointed at me. Her face was filled with worry. "If you hit your brother again, don't ever call me Mom again." I let out a cold laugh. I slapped Daniel again right in front of her. "You think I actually want to be your son?" I shook my hand. I took the wet wipe the bodyguard handed me and cleaned up. Then I said calmly, "All along, I have only respected my adoptive parents. As for you two, in my eyes, you're nothing. You still think highly of yourselves. Busy as can be over there." William's expression turned grim. I watched him with great interest. I said coldly, "If Daniel doesn't pay me back for the watch today, I'll just have him sent to prison." I heard that I'm going to send Daniel to prison. Sophia's arrogance vanished in an instant. She seemed particularly dejected. Daniel sensed the severity in my words. He was so scared that he quickly hugged my leg. He cried uncontrollably, "Brother, don't do this. Michael, please just let me go. It's my fault for not recognizing greatness. It's my fault for being a petty person. Just let me go." I really can't afford to pay. I patted his shoulder. Speak. You could sell your BMW to cover it, right? Daniel looked confused. He said in a daze, even if that BMW is sold, it would only be worth at most $300,000. I can't even gather enough for the small change. I pulled my leg away from his grip. Smiling, I said to him, is that so? I thought it would be quite expensive. Otherwise, why would you use the custom-made suit jacket I paid a fortune for to wipe the car? Oh right. I slowly turned my head. I looked at Manager Gao, who had been pretending to be a wooden man and dared not speak up. I remember Manager Gao even stepped on it, didn't he? The two of them mechanically shifted their gaze to beneath the car in the distance. The suit jacket that was soaked in mud and unrecognizable in color. It felt as if the sky had fallen. Manager Gao's eyes were red. He was panting heavily. He kicked Daniel hard in the chest. Angry curses erupted instantly. Daniel got up from the ground. He cried and shouted. He hurried to pick up the clothes on the ground. He rinsed the wrinkled suit under the faucet several times. Then he knelt in front of me, holding the crumpled suit. He suppressed the dissatisfaction in his heart. He humbly begged for my forgiveness. I've already cleaned it for you. Please let me go. I squinted my eyes. I said slowly, I can overlook the issue with the clothes. Daniel just showed a smile. I'll just continue speaking, but the $200 million for the watch cannot be overlooked. After all, no one's money falls from the sky. Daniel felt he had been played. He stood up angrily. He pointed at me and started scolding. His tone carried a sense of self-destructive defiance. How do I know if your watch is real? You say it's worth $200 million, so it is. The most I can compensate you is $2,000. I can't afford any more than that. Seeing that I remained silent, Daniel suddenly gained confidence. He raised his head, with his nostrils facing me. His eyes were full of pride. He was even more convinced that my watch was fake. Because there are only 3 of that brand's watches in the world. No matter how capable I am, it's unlikely I would own that watch. Sophia came back to her senses. She stood next to Daniel. If you have the ability, then bring out the evidence. Otherwise, don't think you can slander Daniel at will. Let's go, since you want to see the evidence. Then I'll just show it to you directly. I opened the order on my phone in front of them, the watch I bought last year. All the invoices and documents are saved on my phone. In front of the camera, Daniel's initially confident expression suddenly became flustered. In the end, he almost couldn't stand. I put down my phone and cheerfully left a message. I'll give you just 3 days. If you can't raise the money, my lawyer will have you sent to prison. This sentence completely broke Daniel down. Sophia was about to defend Daniel. Daniel went crazy. He suddenly slapped Sophia. Sophia stood there in shock, looking at the son she had worked so hard to raise for over 20 years. Now he actually laid hands on her for money. Her heart was shattered. William sternly reprimanded Daniel, but Daniel lost control of his emotions. He directly fought with his father, completely disregarding the father-son bond. Daniel swings his fists while accusing them. If it weren't for you all insisting on seeing how miserable your abandoned son is, how would I have ended up like this? And my mom, if it weren't for her always wanting to compare, how would I have ruined his watch worth $200 million? I think the ones who should be punished the most are you. If it weren't for you all, how would I be facing the risk of jail time for not being able to pay $200 million? William keeps throwing punches, but he is no match for the young and strong Daniel. Stop hitting, stop hitting. Sophia cries and steps forward, trying to pull them apart, but she is hit by Daniel's punch. I don't want to cause a death at the doorstep. Quick, call the bodyguards to intervene. A few people pull Daniel away together. William, bruised and battered, weakly shouts, "You unfilial son, you should go to jail. It's best to stay in prison for a lifetime. This farce has finally come to an end." After the program aired, it caused quite a stir in society. Everyone is criticizing the behavior of those parents. I fired Manager Gao on the spot. Lai took over his position. Daniel couldn't raise the money at all. He secretly sold William and Sophia's house. He also took all the money from the house. He planned to escape abroad. In the end, he was stopped by my people at the airport. He was taken to the police station. William and Sophia lost their house. They could only move into a small alley and rent a place. I heard that those two liked to boast to outsiders. They claimed their son was a billionaire tycoon, but they never mentioned their son who is serving time. Viewers who watched the show just laugh. Privately, they thought those two were a bit excessive. Meanwhile, my adoptive parents worked hard all their lives. I will do my best to give them the best life. Everyone says my adoptive parents found a treasure, but I know, without their silent support behind me, there wouldn't be the successful me today.